So with that, I just want to thank you for joining us. It's going to be a great discussion today. And you've got the questions. You spent a little bit of time, hopefully, taking a look at those. Jay's given a little bit of a review. So with that, again, we'll turn it over to Jason to get us started. Jason?
And I'm just sitting in the wilds of Northwest Territories here, conducting this discussion. So thanks everybody for thanks everybody for joining the discussion here. As I mentioned, the idea here is really to get everybody's input, your perspectives. We have a really eclectic group of business leaders here from a number of our projects that we've supported, and everyone is involved in progressing, advancing the advanced manufacturing sector here in Canada. But of course, that sector and manufacturers around the world, industry around the world, is facing some major challenges. A lot of them supply chain related challenges, but broadening out from the idea of supply chains into the idea of value chains, what it takes to produce value for customers today, really widens the discussion a lot more than just simply product supply chains. To now we're talking about how innovation works into this, and how partnerships, how international development plays a key role here as well. But I think we can all kind of look back 3 years ago to the good old days when supply chain problems were only a ship stuck in the Suez Canal. And now, of course, we're looking at conflict in Ukraine, the impact that that's had. We're looking at growing trade tensions and trade restrictions, demographic problems, that aging population can't get enough people, which is affecting industry around the world. And of course, logistics bottlenecks as well, and real disruptions in shipping over the past couple of years. If anything, that might be getting a little bit better, but there's still some major problems in terms of transportation and logistics as well. So everybody comes from a different perspective, and I'm going to just move across my screen here and ask everybody maybe to introduce yourself, introduce your company, and say a few things about what you're seeing right now. What are the major challenges that your business is facing, or your broader value chain is facing? Maybe start with Kevin from Macrodyne.
Thanks, Jay. My name is Kevin Fernandez. I'm the president here at Macrodyne. We're the largest hydraulic press manufacturer in North America. We make some pretty big stuff, 50, 65 feet tall, can weigh 1 million, 2 million, 4 million pounds. So when we talk about supply chain disruptions, we're really talking about stuff that's required to make really big equipment. What we faced, I think everyone's faced this electronics disruption, but it does seem to slowly be getting better. We faced an equal disruption in getting robots. A lot of folks want to do automation, and so looking for robots, there's been a disruption there, but again, we see that getting better. What we don't see getting better is the capital goods infrastructure to manufacture big things. So I mentioned, our presses can be up to 4 million pounds. Usually a component's 80 tons. There's not a lot of folks out there that can weld up to 80 tons, that can machine up to 80 tons. And people are hesitant to add additional capital equipment to do that in the given environment. So that's probably the biggest challenge I'm seeing right now.
Thanks, Scott. Next to my screen is David.
Yeah, David McNaughton. I'm Canadian president of Palantir Technologies. The company started 18 years ago, really after 9/11, focused on the fact that there was very little sharing of information among the intelligence services in the United States, and developed technologies to actually bring real-time data together from disparate sources. And then in about 2014-15, obviously started to apply that approach to the commercial sector, and really have focused a lot on complex supply chain problems, companies with multiple manufacturing sites where they were delegating all of the decision making down to the local level, but not sharing data together and not being able to capture opportunities for for either savings or for increased revenues. And what's really happened in the last few years, because of not just the pandemic issues and some of the other logistical, but all of the things that Jay mentioned, the political uncertainty, that Ukraine situation, everything else, a lot of our business is now focused on helping companies understand better in real time all of the complex issues that come into managing their supply chain. So it really is a big focus. We've done lots of work around the world with companies that have complex supply chain challenges. And I wouldn't say that we've perfected them all, but we've shown many companies how they can save a lot of money in terms of better understanding all of the complex issues that go into decision making around supply chain.
Thanks, David. And there are lots of complex issues. When we started looking at some of the supply chain challenges a couple of years ago, one thing that we heard a lot was, well, we know what our suppliers are doing, but we don't know what their suppliers are actually facing too. And I think that's something that our project with Palantir has really helped, particularly in the auto parts side, to take a look at a broader network, which is going to be even more important, not just in terms of managing risk, but when it comes to things like mapping out carbon footprint right across the supply chain, or tracking and tracing quality product across international supply chains. These are going to be even more important to get that type of data. So Barry, you're next, and I met Barry Hunt really early on when we were trying to scale up the production of critical products to fight the pandemic. Various parts of the PPE supply chain, but also medical devices, biomanufacturing. And if there's something that really hit home right at the very beginning of the pandemic, is that we didn't have a lot of this product in Canada, and there was a real push to produce more critital product in Canada. So Barry, tell us a little bit about what you're doing, what Prescient does.
Sure. So, I'm Barry Hunt, the president and CEO of Prescient, and we're primarily in the engineered infection prevention space. So, developing technologies and materials that keep particularly healthcare facilities safe, but now other community spaces, public spaces, et cetera, safe as well. And we also pivoted during the pandemic to produce respirators, that were desperately needed for PPE. And so the good news out of the whole pandemic, really that supply chain interruption of PPE brought Jay and I together. So thanks, Jay. And I think, it's given us an opportunity to have some input into government, not just on PPE side, but into supply chain for healthcare in particular, but also some other things as well. And there's a lot of things that we have in common. There are critical components that are computer chips or rare earth metals, et cetera. But PPE for us was the start of it. And it was really, I think, the canary in the coal mine that said, okay, when the chips are down, the countries that have X are going to hang on to it, and they're going to look after themselves. And that even included our allies, our friends. So in the US, we were locked out of getting respirators and PPE and even certifications for respirators in the US, and kind of still are. So it's really incumbent upon us to have domestic supply chains for critical infrastructure, for critical items. And, again, that's going to be more and more important, I think, as we go forward. There's the geopolitical instability, of course, but in my world, there's the healthcare side of it. And we have odd things that have happened here in Canada, weird things like the government effectively banned UV products here in Canada because they wanted to regulate UV installations during an airborne pandemic. And so for 2.5 years, Canadian manufacturers of UV products that are desperately needed for pandemic use are restricted from selling. Well, those are things that we need to address by having one arm of government talk to another arm of government to get that looked after. But going forward, the impact of, originally we had lockdowns that were a problem, then we had COVID was a problem, and now we have long COVID as a problem. So labor shortages, et cetera, and continuing burden on hospitals and costs of healthcare. We're spending $11.2 billion a year now just to treat COVID patients in hospital, with 7% of our hospital beds are already tied up for this year before we continue on this year. So there's a lot of things that we need to look at that are going to interrupt. But for me, I always worry now about the next pandemic. So this one's getting worse and worse, even though it's not the data is not being shared. David, you and I should talk about data sharing. But we have H5N1 around the corner that has in 20 years emerged and then jumped from birds to mammals, and now mammal to mammal, and now we're just waiting it to go human to human, right? Cambodia just this week has had one death, and then now the father of the girl that just died of bird flu has it. And, once it gets to human transmission, now you have a disease of 50% mortality. And so it's not COVID. It's not a low mortality, it's a high mortality. And more of these diseases are going to keep coming out. So those are risks that we're going to have to face, because we have to figure out a way to manage our economies and manage our businesses around that. And it's not hard, but we have to face the data and put better ventilation in and better respiratory PPE when we need it, where we need it, and that's it, and continue on. So, thanks, Jay.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. That's a bit of a cold shower, but
sorry.
a realistic view of the risks that we don't know the risks that lie ahead. There's some pretty severe ones there, and how important this is for Canadians, for the world as a whole, not just for manufacturing, of course, too. Louis-Antoine, I wanted to ask you, Barry was mentioning some of the problems around workforce, and in not only in manufacturing, of course, but in a lot of sectors, and not only in Canada, but we're seeing rapid rates of retirement as baby boomers step back, and not as many young people entering the workforce in particularly in advanced manufacturing. The numbers in Canada are something like 25-26% of the present workforce will be retired in 10 years. And you've got about 5 or 6% of the workforce composed of people under the age of 30. So labor shortages are here to stay. And companies are going to react and are reacting by increasing the degree of automation. So we're not only facing labor shortages, and which we will continue to face, but we'll be continuing to face skill shortages as well. So Louis-Antoine, please introduce yourself. DeepSight is a great project partner that has developed a solution exactly for some of those problems.
Yes, so my name is Louis. I'm the head of sales at DeepSight, which is a software as a service leveraging augmented reality and smart glasses for knowledge management in the manufacturing sector. So I'm less focused on the logistics side, but you mentioned a great point, Jason. Just to give you an idea, I have the statistics for Quebec. In Quebec, the labor shortage today is about 250,000 jobs to fill. By 2030, we estimate, Statistics Canada estimates that it's going to be 1.4 million jobs, vacant jobs only in Quebec. And the situation is pretty much similar for the rest of Canada. So if we think that we're having an issue today with labor shortage, it's going to get worse. The main risk with that is that most companies don't have a succession plan. They don't have their procedures documented, or if they are, they're poorly documented. And so we're going to have to train a next generation of workers with less documentation. And so the next generation of workers will be less skilled, and they will have less resources to get skilled. So what we developed at DeepSight is a suite of tools to automate the knowledge capture of these experts that are leaving for retirement, but also to automate the knowledge transfer to the next generation. And this is going to be vital even for, a global supply chain, because we're seeing countries like China, for example, that traditionally had a highly skilled workforce, and today their workforce is less skilled. They're transitioning like Western countries more to university studies for most of the population. So we need to find ways to transfer the technical knowledge that we have today to the next generation of workers, and we think that this can be automated through smart glasses and augmented reality. Nice to meet you all.
Great, thanks, Louis-Antoine. And Gary, you're up next, but as we're looking at supply chain issues and broaden that out into today, the discussion is around reduction of carbon emissions. Extremely important for manufacturers around the world to take the initiative here, and great challenges, but also some big opportunities coming up. Tell us a little bit about what Carbocrete does, and what some of the supply chain issues that you see.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Yeah, my name is Gary. As mentioned, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of a startup company. It's 5 years in the making, but it's still a startup called Carbocrete. Before I get into what Carbocrete does, I have to tell you that between Louis-Antoine, who was telling us about less and less skilled workers, and then Barry was telling us that those less skilled workers we have are going to get bird flu, I'm getting a little depressed here.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll stick to the supply chain. So Carbocrete, as I said, was founded in 2016. I've got 20 plus years experience. I was in the Navy before, and then I've got 20-year experience in the concrete world. And that's why I came to Carbocrete. This Carbocrete has developed technology that's patented across the world that allows us to make concrete products, but with no cement content whatsoever. I mentioned before, cement is about 8% of CO2 emissions in the world. So if you eliminate cement from that process, it's kind of a cool deal. And on top of that, the technology, and we replace cement by a byproduct of a reject, basically, of the steel manufacturing industry called slag. That slag, typically, a very small percentage of it can be used for road aggregate, but for the most part, it needs to be buried somewhere, and it costs money to do that. It's a big problem. So slag becomes a replacement for cement, and on top of that, to make that slag firm up the concrete product, we need to inject CO2 into a chamber. So not only are we carbon neutral because we've eliminated cement, but all of a sudden, re-injecting CO2, we become carbon negative. So the blocks and the pavers that we produce as a result are anywhere between 0.5 to 0.7 kilogram negative. So every time you put one of our blocks, you're basically reducing CO2 in the atmosphere. That's what brought me here about 6 months ago. I didn't believe it at first. I saw it firsthand, and they blew me away with the technology, and we're very excited about it. Now, one of the first challenge that I faced when I came here, we're in the process of a component of our technology is what we call the curing chamber. And typically when you manufacture concrete products with cement, you put the products in the curing chamber, you heat it up a bit, and 24 hours later, your block is pretty much firmed up. With slag, because we need to inject CO2, we have a special pressurized curing chamber. It's low pressure, but it's still pressurized. So it's a more complex, technologically advanced chamber. And when I came on board, we were installing or manufacturing and installing our first 2 curing chambers at a test site, a partner, a company called Patio Drummond outside of Montreal. And the project, because of supply chain issues, and we had a manufacturer and engineering firm from Calgary, actually, local Canadian firm. The people before me were smart enough to at least try and keep the supply chain close to within the country. But in spite of that, we were at least 6 months behind. in installing or getting our chamber. And it wasn't from lack of trying from our local manufacturers, but they were dependent, like most of you guys were talking about, on components on which they had no control. Very high-tech stuff, control panels, controlled boards, etc. So not only were we 6 months late because of the delay in getting those parts, but on top of that, we had to make a lot of adjustments and find suitable replacement, because we would have probably been a year and a half late. So in finding those replacements, we ended up being at least 40% over budget in our project. So it's been a horrendous experience for us. And looking forward to the future, we're looking at all kinds of alternatives to try and prevent that. This was just a test, but we need to build between 400 to 500 of those chambers over the next 5 years. So needless to say, we need to look at alternatives, not to suffer the same kind of experience as we did the first time around. Big challenge for us.
Thanks, Gary. Let me move on to Eric. And Eric's got I think, a strategic view as head of Saskatchewan Industrial Mining Suppliers Association, both from some of the supply chain constraints for your members, Eric, but also some of the opportunities that some of your members are also facing. So what does it look like out in Saskatchewan? How much snow do you guys have?
Well, it's minus 31. The wind chill is 40. There's a fair bit of snow. I need heat. No, it is colder than hell here, frankly. But I can say
it's a balmy sunny day.
Yeah. We're probably one of the few places on Earth that's really benefiting from the Ukraine being invaded. We produce food, fertilizer, and nuclear fuel. And which Russia was fertilizer and nuclear fuel, which now got cut off. So Cameco buys Westinghouse and now are providing all the nuclear fuel to the Ukraine. And they'll probably be announcing Poland and Czechoslovakia to follow, which is all based on stuff mined here. Right? Kazakhstan, Cameco's world headquarters is literally down the street from me. We're also the world's leading producer of nutrient, the world's leading producer of fertilizer is also based here just down the street. They're both here. And when Russia and Belarus got cut off, all of a sudden a bunch of the world's fertilizer got cut off. So we're producing that. The other problem is when Ukraine got invaded, all of a sudden one of the world's largest crop producers got taken off the market. So our crops are now worth more, and the fertilizer to grow more crops became scarce because of Russia and Belarus, which all once again comes back here. So we're doing okay. We have a labor shortage. We're probably short about 70,000 workers in our sector alone. Automation would be a good idea. I'm thank Jason for putting this event together to help me solve my problems. Kevin, you mentioned capital needs and large pressure. We have a lot of members that regularly work with things up to 200 tons in steel fabrications. Pressure vessels for not only the potash sector and crystallizers, but also work for the oil sands sector in Alberta. We just ship them. They're 200 tons and they're put 4 semis together and 4 tractors to push them. But we'll take them from here into Alberta. We have transportation routes. We're working with BHP on carbon reduction. We have an agreement with them. We are the vet for local content for the Jansen Potash Project, which right now is about 10 billion and probably another 5 coming in the next couple of years. We're doing all that, but also with them, we're working on the carbon reduction strategies for the world. So anything we can do there. So carbon tracking, David, we'll need you. Barry Hunt, I've already met with about PPE stuff. Knowledge transfer will probably become a big thing, Louis, for us as we try to grow and everybody's retiring. We're going to need to get that going. Carbon-free, cement-free concrete, we use a lot here. I'll need to talk to you, Gary, and get that plugged into our systems. We got people here doing that. We also have exclusive agreements. We're the supply chain developer for the province anyway for X-Energy, GE Hitachi, and the organization Canadian Nuclear Industry. So all the SMR work, we're doing that. I'm putting together a meeting, and given chemicals here, we're also doing nuclear fuel work. We're getting asked for export help now. I put together an event for the government of Kazakhstan on March 6th in Toronto to help them develop their potash basins, and then work with them on the middle corridor and developing the supply chain. connecting China to Kazakhstan through the Caspian Sea, Uzbekistan, Georgia, into Turkey, and then into Eastern Europe. Steel is a shortage for us. Labor's a problem, but maybe robots and knowledge transfer can help that out. Yeah. So that's what we're working on. It's busy and it's really important, but we're doing it.
Thanks, Eric. You probably want to meet with Mitch and Billy here, who I'm going to introduce in a few minutes too. So these guys are both leaders in the field of additive manufacturing.
Yeah.
Mitch,
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself first. So totally disruptive type of manufacturing technology, but also one that's facing some pretty big challenges too.
Certainly. Thanks, Jay. Amazing group here. So diverse. And yeah, it's great to be meeting all of you. I'll definitely follow up with a few of you afterwards to pick your brains. But yeah, I'm one of the founders of Mosaic Manufacturing. We began it about 10 years ago now. Very lucky to be funded by NGen, supporting us with a bunch of partners in Canada to bring 3D printing to the factory floor. Historically, scaling up manufacturing, many companies, especially in the mechatronics, consumer product space, are forced to go overseas. We saw that 3D printing could offer them a ton of benefits, much greener approach, the ability to cut super long lead times down to a much shorter amount, to iterate on their designs more quickly, and excitingly to do things locally. The problem is, anyone who's used a 3D printer before will know parts coming off are expensive and it's very slow. So what we did is we solved that problem from a first principles perspective. We mass parallelize the process and apply automation so that you drastically cut down on the dependence on skilled labor. So that people can be engineering and designing rather than going in at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night to run the printers. So over the past 5 years, we've kind of out of stealth launched this into the market, and excitedly, our biggest customer is contracted to buy 300 of our array systems, which is 1,200 printers. It's over 1 million print hours capacity, and they're going to be making 100,000 pieces a day of one of their products. So this is true scale. This is true manufacturing, and they're shutting down their factory in China and opening it up in a few places in Canada and the US. So that's our business. We full stack software, hardware, materials, support, you name it. And it's interesting because we sit on both sides of this problem. We're helping companies onshore their manufacturing, but we ourselves are a manufacturer who really struggle with, over the past 3 years, we've transitioned half of our manufacturing from China to Canada, which is really exciting, but admittedly really challenging. There's so many problems and things that we just aren't there yet on, and we're trying to kind of fit a square peg into a round hole to make it happen. So it's an interesting challenge. And I guess one comment I want to make on what we're seeing in our space. A lot of businesses, they see why it's compelling to onshore and to switch from injection molding or die casting or CNC machining to 3D printing. But there's always that early adopter risk. That's not everyone's an early adopter. Some companies, they look for ways to de-risk it, and not everyone can be part of NGen. So they look to the broader government, they look for programs, and there isn't a ton that helps companies build factories in Canada, at least at the small level. So we are seeing a lot of customers who are in that place where they kind of want to wait a few years to see all the other successful deployments so that it's de-risked. And until then, they're still comfortable saying, it's twice as expensive, it's twice as slow, but I'm used to working with China, so I'll keep working with China. And just getting people past that hump, this isn't news to anybody, but change can be a bit scary for a lot of companies. And that's one of the things that we face.
Thanks, Mitch. I want to come back to this issue about onshoring in a minute, and maybe come back to you on that. But let me introduce Billy Rideout too from Exergy. Billy, you've been working with energy companies and additive, and have both a view in terms of overall industry supply problems, but also some of the opportunities that you see as well. So it's a common theme here, I think, across everybody. But tell us what you're seeing out in Calgary.
Yeah, we play more in the heavy industry and energy space, and definitely, Eric, there's a value in us getting together because we also supply to mining more in Alberta, oil sands, and there's probably some really good opportunities to see how we can help the fertilizer business and nuclear and the mining side of things there. I would say, kind of big picture, we work more with energy and heavy industry, and the opportunity we're seeing right now is that from a supply chain point of view, sometimes they'll have like a turnaround, they'll crack open the equipment and then they'll find out that things are worn out, and then they go try to find it and they can't. So the additive manufacturing, digital inventory notion, upgrading materials, and as you're actually, say, 3D printing parts for those industries is starting to see some traction for us here. I think that when a facility is down, there's millions of dollars a day. So they see this as an opportunity to kind of keep the operations reliable and running steady. I would say that post-pandemic, I would say that there's like when Mitch talks about what's going on, which is great news with his array system, like I think that's almost triggered like a think differently mindset. So they're now, even though like economics and the cost of the part are a factor, but it's that security of supply chain that to me is driving some of those decisions. So they're exploring these spaces, be it systems that Mitch offers or metal systems. I see the challenge though is we don't have a large, we've been talking about robots, automation, say lights out manufacturing. It's very capital intensive, and I think there would probably be a consolidation in this space because these are big multi-million-dollar investments, robots that are picking parts, and I think we can definitely onshore, but these are very capital intensive installations. So I think that's going to be one of the bigger challenges as we want to onshore additive manufacturing is really the scaling up those installations. Because it's a chicken and egg, the additive business. You got to find applications, you got to bring customers, you got to be able to base load your machines. And so that's the challenge. But yeah, overall, I mean, what a great group of people here, great diverse group of people. I'm definitely going to reach out to a few of you after the call. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we've all kind of touched on it. And sorry, I don't want to let Sean off the hook here as well, because Sean does a lot of work particularly with smaller companies too, and helping them grow, but also just helping them manage their business. So, Sean, what are you seeing here from the kind of the front line of some of the companies you work with?
Well, I think very much, as many have mentioned, from a supply chain standpoint, some issues have been resolved. I was saying to somebody this morning, it's like if you travel a lot, depending on where you go, it's what COVID, right? Because you'd think in some cases when you're on an airplane, COVID never existed. So a lot of issues have been resolved, but there are some underlying issues that many companies are still facing with specialty products, electronics, steel. I think that the challenge that I'm interested in David's perspective on is, the idea of nearshoring, which some of you have mentioned. I think the biggest obstacle is cost. And if that cost can be surpassed, the next challenge is where do we find the people? Because now we're bringing more manufacturing, more business to Canada. And that's going to take more labor that we just don't have. So, I kind of echo what everybody here has said, and I'm interested in some of the perspectives as we go forward.
Yeah, well, let's talk about whether it's nearshoring, onshoring, friendshoring. All of these terms are being used right now. If you look at the economic data for Canada, the amount of product that manufacturers are importing from China and from the United States is just about exactly the same today as it was 3 years ago. So there isn't a lot of evidence yet that a lot of onshoring is going on across the entire manufacturing sector. But I do want to talk about like what lies ahead here. The one thing that has changed over the pandemic, though, is that Canadians are buying more Canadian product than ever before. The strange thing is that the displacement of imports is not from China, it's from the United States. And which is it's not what you expect with everybody talking about North American consolidation, integration, and onshoring. So maybe let me ask David a very specific question here, because there are all sorts of issues that that Canada has given our integrated supply chain with the United States, and of course the new act that the Biden administration has championed a number of pieces of legislation that aiming at strengthening U.S. manufacturing and reshoring production into the United States. So let me ask a specific question to David, and then open it up to the group. As you know, David, from you have a great view as Canada's former ambassador to the United States. What lies ahead here for Canada? Is there really an advantage for onshoring in Canada here?
Yeah, I mean, I think medium to long term there is. I think there's no question that we face some hurdles in the short term. I think there are a lot of people in Canada think that, Democrats are more friendly to Canada than Republicans, and the reality is that the protectionist element within the Democratic Party is very, very strong, and you saw that in Biden's State of the Union, where he talked about Buy America, not just in general terms, but in very specific terms, and talked about even things like lumber being part of the Buy America. And I expect that, and part of what's happened, and I will give Biden some credit for pulling together the alliance against Russia and the invasion of Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. He actually does think that the word ally means something, which Trump really didn't. But they're gonna confront the reality after whenever that war is over, that that the rest of the world is not very happy about the protectionist elements that are being placed. And Janet Yellen talks about friendshoring, but there's no evidence that they're doing anything to facilitate their allies being part of the economic solution. And I think that's going to be the dominant subject when Biden comes to Canada. I think that they're going to want to talk about critical minerals, and I understand that, and that's good for us. But we also need to have sort of an integrated view of this market, which was the whole concept behind the renegotiation of the NAFTA. And I think the reality is that, and you saw it when Macron came over and visited the U.S. And said, this IRA thing is fine, except that you're asking us to get off of Russian oil and gas, and in the meantime, you're putting all the incentives in terms of building your industry in the United States. So I think this is going to be a really, really intense discussion over the next little while, and I think Canada's going to end up in a pretty good spot because we do have things that they need, and I really I know. Everybody's kind of looking at the world today and saying, oh my God, this is awful, pandemic and labor shortages and political uncertainty and everything else. But I look to what Eric said and about Saskatchewan. If you think about it, and I said this in a speech the other day, I said, things are terrible in Canada. They're really awful. And I'm thinking about moving somewhere. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a country that's got all sorts of energy resources, that have all the mineral resources that are going to be needed for transition, that's got a robust agricultural sector, that's got access to 25% of the world's fresh water, and has a positive attitude towards immigration. Does anyone know any country like that? And I think the reality is that, yeah, we face some really big challenges, but I can't think of another country that is as ideally positioned as Canada. And I think and hats off to you, Jay, and the whole Engine team, what is needed is much more collaboration between government and industry and among governments in this country, and put aside the sort of the petty politics of that happens to dominate social media, and get along with meeting all of the things that the opportunities we've got, rather than looking at the negative side of it. So, but it isn't going to be smooth sailing. It's going to be bumpy as hell, and you know, it's going to take a few years for all of this to sort out. I just think that we are, both from a natural resource point of view, but also from a human resource point of view, we've got some really talented people. Just looking around this group of entrepreneurs and people that really want to help build, a terrific economy. So I'm occasionally I get discouraged, but mostly I'm optimistic about what we can do in this country.
Thanks, David. And so let's talk about some of those opportunities that everybody sees, because I think we do get kind of tied up on the risk side and the impact on cost, and particularly in the innovation space. Where we are seeing more activity is in the new innovative types of advanced manufacturing. That's where we are seeing a lot more. And as Eric says, problems in one part of the world are creating opportunities right here in Canada. So Eric, it looks like you want to jump in.
Well, I've a question for David really quick. I didn't realize your previous role. So we're working on nuclear fuel work here, obviously. The big issue that we run into would be enrichment of nuclear fuel. And so Cameco has a big share of the global laser enrichment piece, which is in the US, but they can't export it back to Canada because of nuclear nonproliferation. So we can do we can mine the fuel, we can mine the uranium, turn it into yellow cake, send it off to Ontario, which we'll probably do here next, convert it into UF6. Then we have to send it down to the US to be enriched and then bring it back here. And so we kind of need that streamlined, or the ability. Do you see any change in that policy in the enrichment thing, or are we just kind of stuck with it?
No, I mean, look, I think that the nuclear industry faces, it's got some really big opportunities, obviously, with the SMRs and all that kind of stuff. But I think the streamlining, or the making sense of the regulation is a great opportunity. And I don't know, I hadn't realized that complexity, but it doesn't make any sense to me. And if we're looking at an integrated North American market, and we did do a lot in terms of harmonizing regulations, so you didn't have all of those problems. So I don't think it's an impossible thing by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think you should, you shouldn't be patient with that kind of stuff, because that doesn't make any sense at all.
Okay, thank you. So the one thing that I forgot to mention we're working on, which I think opens up to the group. So rare earth elements, there are 2 rare earth element manufacturing facilities off the back corner of where I'm sitting. One, the Saskatchewan Research Council is there, and then Vital Minerals is right there. Like literally, I could hit them both with a stone from our back door. So what's happening is, so the Saskatchewan Research Council has worked to come up with the technologies to separate the rare earths into various little piles so they can actually do something with them. And now they've got that done. And they're chatting with the various battery manufacturers and autos and aerospace and defense companies about the next step in the use of that technology and scaling it up. The key is, though, is it has to happen here because we own the technology, which is kind of nice. So in Saskatoon here in the next bit, there's going to be a bunch of rare earth element manufacturing kicking in. That has to happen here. What I'm working on with them is finding the suppliers who would do the work, so that if Ford comes here and says, we want to do magnets or something here, they want to know who's the supply chain, who can do the work, right? If we set up here, de-risk this thing. So that's another thing we're working on. That's an opportunity. I mean, these things are, I'm just sitting here watching them all come in. I did an event 2 weeks ago with the governments of Mali, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, and Guinea, helping them build mining supply chains, because they're realizing how dangerous it is to be dependent on others for supply chains. And we got Ukraine coming here to Cameco. We're doing stuff with countries all over the world now, like we never did before, because people are desperate to secure their food and energy. And that's what we got. And if I mean, the opportunities are gargantuan. So anyway, if anybody wants to help in the rare earth thing, let me know.
Thanks, Eric. Kevin, did you, I saw your,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of the points. I would say that although you may not have seen the onshoring occur, it is occurring. We're in the capital goods industry. We have customers, one customer spending $50 million to reshore, 50 million US to reshore semiconductor manufacturing. We're doing a complete lights out facility for them. It's the presses, the press tending automation, automatic guided vehicles. It'll be one person to operate an entire factory, which normally would have had dozens, if not 100 employees. And I think that's the shift that we need to start to look at is, historically, governments have always been about job creation, and I think that's good. But if we focus on job creation when we have a lack of lack of workers, it doesn't help us. We just start competing for the same resources. It's not a good strategy. I think generally we need to focusing on the optimum capital allocation. So getting the right pieces of equipment, to, as some of the other folks have said, to install robots and automation is very expensive. So we need to look at the right supply chains, the right pieces of equipment, pieces of capital goods, pieces of manufactured goods that we want to be in so that we can make the best of it. And I'm seeing that right now. Like we've got some huge projects doing that sort of thing where we're picking specific products that we can manufacture much more cost effectively with automation. So I do think you're going to see it. You're just in the capital goods acquisition process right now. So you probably won't see it hit the books for another year or so.
Well, that's the problem with economics. You think that things shift overnight or shift automatically. And of course it takes, in some cases, takes years to set up that, set up the facility, set up the capital there. So that's a good, really good point. Kevin, anyone else in terms of, some of the opportunities you see opening up? Harry.
Yeah, Jay, I want to jump on the train there with David and Eric about, the very positive things that we see here right now. And I'm hoping we are going to try and leverage those things on the world stage, because we do have all the resources in the world, the land, the water, the minerals, the rare earth metals, et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot going for us there, but we have a great educated workforce. We have proximity to a giant, trading partner market, the US market right next door. And we've got some pretty strong support on the innovation side for advancing things. So those are all good. We also have some great, I think, attractors or magnets for bringing in talent, right? We've got strong and affordable universities and colleges, and, that you want to bring your kids into, your family into, if you're a smart person. We are like number one for freedom and democracy and happiness and all those other quality of life measures. We're a very safe country. We have a great reputation for that, for ethics and rule of law, et cetera. And we have universal health care, or still, even though it's a bit in flux, we have universal. So there's a lot of things to draw the talent in, and a lot of things that companies are looking for. And I think the one piece that we're missing, and we're not missing it here in the innovation space, I think we're missing the NGENs in all the other ministries and all the other departments of government. So collaboration between industry and government is really a key. I look all over the world and I see countries like Sweden, for example. I go to all these, international meetings, or we're writing global standards for different things. And Sweden's government funds so many industry representatives to go and write ISO standards for whatever it happens to be. And they punch way above their weight and export way more than what you would expect. And we're not doing that here in Canada. We need to tie procurement in with innovation. We need to tie solutions for, pragmatic things like, processing uranium or healthcare solutions, all of that sort of thing. We need an NGEN in every ministry, or a pragmatic, strategic, department set up for every industry to work together, to collaborate, industry and government together. And right now, I think government has traditionally taken the view that they don't trust industry, that, they're the other guys, that sort of thing. But it can't be that way. It has to be a Team Canada approach. And we have all the resources there if we can just work together collaboratively. And I know industry is working together a lot more collaboratively amongst themselves. And then here on the innovation side, we're working collaboratively with government. We need to do that through the rest of government. And I think we're there.
That's
Very
good.
great point, Barry. Like around like manufacturing lives everywhere in every vertical in every sector, and I like your your view on there should be engines in all these areas of sorts, like that whole concept, especially if we're looking at onshoring. And I guess one thing I'd say though, like where is that in the government strategy, like specifically around creating onshoring? And I bet you there's hundreds of companies thinking about it, but in order to tip the scales and get them actually making that move, especially when you talk about building a facility where there's one employee, like that doesn't sound very attractive to a government to fund it. But strategically, if we want to win in the long game, we almost have to make these moves. So like almost the criteria for support systems has to change to be more, not within the political cycles, election cycles. It has to kind of think 10, 20 years out. But it's not a very popular, I guess, it wouldn't be a very popular program, given that things will be automated and robots. And although there will be people servicing those robots, highly skilled personnel, and there will be not direct jobs, but indirect. So I maybe something for Jason or David to kind of comment on.
The one thing I will tell you is that when Trump came to power and he threatened to rip up NAFTA, and everybody realized that this was an existential threat to our prosperity in the country. What happened was that there was a remarkable coming together of industry and government and federal and provincial governments. I went right across the country. I met with every premier and every cabinet. We had regular contact with all sorts of industry. And what was remarkable about it was that everybody kind of checked their either specific interest or politics at the door. And we're looking out for the thing. And had we not had that, I can tell you for sure, we would not have been successful, because it gave us insight as to what the impact was. And, Barry, you would really remember early on in the pandemic when the US wanted to ban PPE from coming into Canada, and all of a sudden they found out that the pulp that was going into the manufacture of the PPE was coming from Nanaimo. And so, it's just that kind of collaboration was, everybody came together where there was a threat. I think what needs to happen now is everybody needs to come together when they realize that there's such an opportunity. Because I don't think we'll be able to capture it fully without that kind of collaboration.
Agreed.
That's really important. I don't know about creating engines all over the place. Maybe just one engine could do the job. But what we're doing is so important in terms of looking at the collaboration, but looking at a real systems approach. Like, it's not just industry. It needs to be government. It needs to be the academic sector and the research sector and the financial investors and everybody who is a part of this. And but it is a pretty powerful model, especially if we can focus on these opportunities coming up. I wanted to ask Louis-Antoine, because the technology that DeepSight has developed is pretty disruptive in terms of being able to quickly, like in real time, help employees understand what they're doing and make decisions here, guided through VRAR, but it's real time, on time training here. How do you see that disrupting the entire education system? Because I think that we talk about skilled workers, and we've got great institutions that work very closely with industry to do training and research and education here. Louis-Antoine, how do you see the education system changing?
Well, Barry spoke about collaborations, and that's definitely a way we work as well. In Quebec, again, I can only speak for Quebec because that's where we work today. We're also a startup, as Gary said. What we see is that the vocational training centers have changed the way they work. Traditionally, they would, develop core competencies for workers. But those core competencies would not make the workers productive day one when they would come in into work. So these those vocational training centers have changed their way of training workers. So instead of doing traditional training, they do what we call just-in-time training. So instead, they're more on the procedural side. They're less on the onboarding side. And so they will literally work with private companies to create work instructions. And so more and more, we see that these vocational training centers have services targeted to companies to create their work instructions, to document their procedures. And instead of just giving general training to the next generation of workers, they're literally creating the procedures that they're going to view on the factory floor. And that's definitely a way that they started to operate because they were under constraint. And sometimes, constraint gives opportunities, and we are today in a period of constraint. So people are obligated to innovate, and the traditional training where you were onboarding somebody for months before they are productive on the factory floor is not possible anymore. And so even educational institutions that had the mandate to develop these core competencies are changing the way they're doing training. And it's sad because, we're not building core competencies, but in the end, our workforce is productive faster. So it just gives you an insight on how, the public side collaborates with the private side to be able to have a workforce that is more productive.
Listen, we're coming up on the hour, and I don't want to take a lot more of your time here, but maybe ask Gary and Mitch just for some closing comments. Gary, your focus here around regenerative material, basically negative carbon material, I think is going to be key to answering some of the problems we have in addressing climate change. What are some of the barriers that you're facing in terms of growing the business here and applying that technology in other areas? Or don't tell us about the problems, just tell us about the opportunities that you see.
Yeah. The opportunities are tremendous. To be honest with you, we haven't done a whole lot in terms of reaching out there for customers, because you build it and they will come, and it really is true in that case. As soon as people hear, they knock on the door, they call. So it's a tremendous opportunity. The challenges associated with there are twofold. One is, of course, like I said, the supply chain issues, which I think we have some solutions going forward, but some of them are going to go back in time and old-fashioned solutions. Some of them are going to be as rudimentary as renting a warehouse and storing pre-manufactured parts, so that and even control panels and all that, so that we're ready to go to market. But that is one issue. But the main issue, I would say, challenging us and everybody else around this table, I believe, is the manpower, the skilled manpower. And our company is filled with engineers, masters of engineers, a few PhDs, and we need more. And that's, we are constantly recruiting and trying to bring people in. The good news is, I think we have good programs to offer them, and we have good challenges to offer those people. And yet, but we still have to find them. And we're competing with probably everybody around this table and other industries as well. So that's going to be our challenge going forward. It's the ultimate challenge for years to come, I'm sure, for all of us, is the skilled labor that we need. But we think we have something very exciting to offer, being in clean tech and all that, the young generation and all that. I think they embrace it, but we will see.
Yeah, you know, in our Careers of the Future initiative, we went out and the idea was to attract young people into advanced manufacturing careers. And we started first talking about all the great technology in advanced manufacturing. And, you know, it's just an expectation on the part of young people. Of course, you have great technology. That's what advanced manufacturing is supposed to be all about. And then you realize that the people who are really have concerns about our young people's ability to work with technology, or people who couldn't work with technology themselves, who still who still have problems putting the mics on and on virtual
Absolutely.
meetings and stuff like that, like me. But what did make a difference with young people was telling them, come and work at advanced manufacturing, because that's the sector that's developing the solutions to address climate change and food security and so forth. So Mitch, and let me just kind of wrap up our discussion by asking Mitch about, you know, you work really closely with a lot of schools, with universities, colleges. What's your view in terms of the future here for not just in terms of the skills issues, but advanced manufacturing and attracting young people in the future?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. It's I was part of a couple of those talks on the Careers of the Future, and it's, you know, young kids, they want to know that they can have impact on things that they care about. And yeah, they do care about the world, the pollution. They care about sort of those topics. And so if you can tell them that they can have impact, I think that can be really attractive to them. But anyhow, I want to keep it short because I know that we're over time here. But yeah, thanks everybody. This has been a great discussion.
Yeah, and I want to echo that. Thanks everybody. A part of it was to have exactly this type of discussion. It helps us a lot, sort of ground ourselves into what's happening out there. But a large part of it as well was to introduce everybody here. And I've always been amazed that as you travel across Canada and talk about different industries and different companies and people working with different technologies, and everybody is facing very unique problems. And in Canada, I'm convinced that as Canadians, we're all unique, but we're all unique in extremely similar ways here. And I think some of the challenges that we've been talking about are common. The opportunities, while specific, are also pretty amazing for the country and for advanced manufacturing going forward. So listen, thanks everybody for taking part today. We'll continue to look forward to working with you, and we'll Sean circulate everybody's email here, and hope this is the beginning of some good business opportunities for everybody too.